Between now and Christmas, one issue that Mark Carney's cabinet will have to address is the growing tension between the federal government, the Federation really, and Alberta. And today, Premier Danielle Smith picked what could turn into another fight. Smith announced that her government is freezing its industrial carbon price, effective immediately.
Instead of supporting our industry, Ottawa wants to increase their industrial carbon tax to $170 per tonne by 2030. This is yet another example of Ottawa overstepping into our provincial jurisdiction with reckless policies that damage our industry.
So this move comes after Smith made it easier to force a separation referendum in the province, something Alberta independence groups have been working towards. Today, one of those groups released a referendum question that it wants to get in front of provincial voters.
This is as serious as a heart attack, and this is what Albertans expect. They want a clear, concise question leading to a clear, unequivocal answer. No more emissions caps, no more production caps, no more federal gun grabs, no more silly interference with our lives on an ongoing basis. Anytime a Liberal wakes up and has a whim in the middle of the night as to what they're going to do to make Albertans' lives miserable next, that will be over post-independence.
Okay, serious as a heart attack. How does Mark Carney and his new cabinet navigate this relationship, Rob? The freezing of the industrial carbon price, I'm not sure that's legal technically because it has to go up to be in compliance with the federal legislation. So puts Mark Carney in a position to maybe have to impose an industrial carbon price in Alberta, which might be politically difficult at this point in time. What do you make of this?
When I listed his priorities, I put national unity at the top. I didn't put the environment at the top. I think that Mr. Carney is going to have to accept, and I think that he probably has, that the environment is going to have to play a lesser role than he might have would have hoped for when he sought this office.
But he said he wants industrial pricing to do more of the work after cutting the consumer carbon tax, right?
When you're surrounded by alligators, you go after the alligator that's closest to you. Right now, the one with the biggest, sharpest teeth is the future of the country. And one of the alligators circling to try it and feast on the remnants of what might be the country is Donald Trump. I keep saying that he's not interested in all of Canada. He'll take it if we all jump into his arms and nuzzle him in the earlobe. But what he would really like to have is the energy-producing parts of the country. And should there be a unilateral declaration of independence, one of the criteria for that to be legal, according to the Supreme Court of Canada, is international recognition. I suspect that Donald Trump would be among the first to recognize a UDI from Alberta, and therein lies grave, grave danger to the country. Mr. Carney needs to make this a priority. I think he will. And the industrial price is not the flashpoint, but he needs to make a pilgrimage to his home province, and he needs to make it clear. And I think by having the First Minister's Conference in Western Canada, he's certainly making a gesture there. He needs to make it clear that he's listening and taking their concerns seriously.
Brad, what do you make of this? Because, it was the consumer carbon tax had to go. Alberta believed in the industrial price. Now it's got to be frozen. The country does have to have some sort of an environmental policy, but it also needs to be a country. I mean, how do you approach this?
Well, yeah, and the Supreme Court has already weighed in that it is federal jurisdiction to set these standards. I think it was under Jason Kenney that took the existence of the consumer, the rights of the federal government or the jurisdiction of the federal government and put it on trial. And the Supreme Court said, no, it does have the authority to do so. So when Danielle Smith in that clip says the feds are interfering with provincial jurisdiction, that is not necessarily, I think, as cut and dry as she would like. As for the other challenge, of course, is we got the G7 coming. That will be taking place in Alberta. The world will be looking. The world will likely ask Mr. Carney questions about that, and probably some other world leaders on this. But let's be clear. Danielle Smith has made this. Has made the issue of succession. She says at one side of her mouth, she says, I don't believe in separating from Canada. Yet at the same time, she makes it easier for the fringe elements within the separatist movement in Alberta to do so, and with a clear question. Nonetheless, we're going to have this debate. So the question before Mr. Carney is going to be, does he take the bait over the industrial carbon pricing, freezing that they're going to be doing, or can he just put that aside for the time being and do the other things that he wants to do that Alberta would like. She set out her terms. She's got 5 or 6 issues that she demands that are doing. Many of those, I think, Carney has already spoken in favor of. Can he make enough headway before the G7 in Alberta? We'll see. But nonetheless, I agree with Rob that national unity is now placed, in addition to pushing back on Trump. National unity has become a big issue, and it's because of the pieces that Smith has been laying out, and this industrial carbon pricing is that piece. Well,
look, some of the things she's asked for, no prime minister can do unilaterally because there's provincial jurisdictions at play and other things that she would be upset about, Lisa, if he was imposing something on Alberta that it didn't want, right? Which is kind of where we are in the situation. So how do you think the prime minister and whoever he puts in the key roles in the cabinet have to deal with this, in the coming weeks and months? Because Smith's demands and the timeline for this referendum are kind of running on the same timeline here and could be amplifying each other.
I would advise anybody who's close to this issue to take it seriously, but as well, take the time to understand where this is coming from. In a good negotiation, you want to understand where the other side is coming from. And as we speak about it and we talk on the surface about demands that are being made and ramping things up, the reality is you have to recognize why this is happening. Why is this happening? Because the province of Alberta and Saskatchewan feel that in the last 10 years, they have not been given the ability to grow their economy because of federal jurisdiction. And Brad, I don't interpret the Supreme Court ruling the way that you just stated it. They actually found that it was provincial jurisdiction, but the federal jurisdiction was allowed because it was such a significant issue with respect to the environment. However, when the Liberal government decided to not go ahead with the tax on home heating fuel, that blew it all up. So who knows where we stand in terms of the federal government being able to intervene on provincial jurisdiction. I think she stands on firm ground there. I also believe personally that the Premier does want to make sure that I take her at her word. When she says she wants Alberta to be part of Canada, I take her at her word. I believe her. And she's managing a situation of very emotional aspects for what people see as being aggrieved issues from the past 10 years. Take it seriously, have a little bit of understanding, and realize that just because we're from Central Ontario, it doesn't mean we all have the answers all the time.
No, look, Yvonne and I remember Andrew Furey, the Liberal Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador. Well, formerly, John Hogan is there now. He argued that the emissions cap violated the Atlantic Accord, which is the agreement that the Newfoundland, Labrador, and Nova Scotia have in terms of their ability to regulate offshore. So these tensions with the centre exist, but there's no sovereignty referendum on the table in Newfoundland and Labrador, right? So it's a slightly different situation. And the Premier, like to Brad's point, while she says she wants to stay in Canada, doesn't support this, she's laying groundwork that allows it to move at an accelerated pace.
Yeah, I mean, she is trying to also save her political career and try to keep her tent of people who feel are loud and vocal, who want, succession. I think what Mr. Carney will do is speak to Albertans directly. And to Lisa's point, understand where they're coming from. I think while most Albertans want to stay in Canada, I strongly believe that. I think most of them also understand that climate change is real and they have to do something with it. And I think speaking to them directly and saying, I understand it. And I think about Ontario, the auto sector, Quebec, the aerospace sector. We all have our provinces with their strengths, and if something's happening to that sector, people get worried, they suffer. And when it comes to tariffs in the U.S., it's actually people who are, the least well off who suffer the most, actually. So I think speaking directly to where Albertans are coming from and finding ways to work. I think Danielle Smith is one thing. She's laying out her ground because she's politically posturing herself. But I think Mr. Carney will take it seriously, but also find a way to appeal directly to Alberta.
She's also given a bit of a pressure release valve to part of her political coalition. She needs to do that, right? Because otherwise it becomes unmanageable. But listening and speaking to Yvonne is one thing. There is a geographic divide and there's a generational divide. I think that we've seen sort of coming out of the country, like younger people that can't afford houses and Albertans, who want to see their resources developed. He's got to deliver something more than empathy and conversation, right? So what are the sort of proof points that the Prime Minister can deliver in under a year when this this potentially goes to the ballot?
I think he'll find pragmatic solutions. If it means some things need to be shelved or they have to be moved or evolved in some way, I think it's about how do you explain that to people. So you're changing your mind, but like, we want national unity. This is important to us. We need this to happen. And I think if he has to shift that because he is a pragmatic leader, I think he'll do so.
So Rob, how do you do that, right? Because you're kind of making a king-size bed with queen-size sheets, right? So if you approve a bunch of projects in Alberta or facilitate those projects and you compromise on your climate goals, well, then Quebec is going to look at you and say, what are you doing, right? This is not what we gave you 44 seats for. How do you approach this with those two polls out there right now?
Well, you make a vow, and you make that vow come to fruition by showing them that you are going to make it easier for them to get their resources to market. And that's been very difficult. Now, you don't have to go through Quebec to do that. If we're talking about
it's one of the demands, though, right?
If we're talking about a west-east pipeline, you can go to Sarnia and then use rail. Rail has always been more dangerous. It's the province of Quebec knows better than any other province how dangerous transporting energy is via rail. But you can do it that way. The growth, though, and I think you can make a climate argument is to the Pacific, where you can displace coal in India, coal in China, coal in Vietnam with Canadian energy, LNG, and hydrocarbons. That is cleaner than coal.
What is the guarantee in that? Because this is the argument I keep hearing. You can sell LNG to India and China. There's no guarantee it displaces coal. It might just increase their power base in addition to the coal. Because, there's no way you can force Modi or Xi to stop doing what they want to do if coal is still cheaper, right?
They're energy thirsty.
Sure, but they keep adding without taking offline.
We don't want them to add coal necessarily. We can even help our European friends. We can say to them, and I understand this is being discussed, for instance, South Korea, for instance, gets energy from the Middle East, right? And Canada can sell energy to South Korea, and there can be a swap between the Europeans and the South Koreans on contracts so that they get their energy from a place that's closer, the Middle East, that was now being transported by ship all the way across the Pacific to Asia. That's a possibility as well. There are lots of things that we can do that can reduce people's dependence on some of the most polluting fuels in the world.
Right. So Brad, I mean, all of this is counting on a prime minister who has been a global climate leader for decades. To compromise pretty significantly on that potentially, unless there is some threading of a needle that he can do here to allow for the scale of energy development in a place like Alberta while still meeting climate targets. I mean, how do you walk that? How do you have that kind of energy development agenda while still meeting emissions reductions targets in Canada? Is it even possible?
That's the question. And also, I would say, is it possible? But also, where is the appetite right now? What is the Canadian sensibilities right now? Where are the priorities? And we've talked about this on the panel. When economic headwinds approach, and when people are concerned about cost of living, their jobs, and things are like, we saw what the Bank of Canada stated just a handful of days ago, that they issued kind of an alert, basically a warning that the economy is facing some real challenges. The minute that's the case, Canadians put the priorities of the environment at lower, and their short-term economic issues front and center. So Carney's going to have to address those. But I don't think this is not new. This is not new. And right now, I don't think that the level of, and we saw what Trudeau placed an emphasis on the environment at the expense, I would submit, of the economy. I think Canadians are at a different place today where they want the economy to take front and center. And I'm not going to give credit to Smith, but nonetheless, the notion that the Western Canada, we also see it in David Eby's NDP government in British Columbia with their Get Stuff Done Quickly bill that's being debated in the legislature right now. There is, I think, a wholesale rethink as to how we get big things done in this country. And I think Carney can tap into that and maybe bring both the Conservatives as well as the NDP Western Premiers along with them, and that would be, I think, a thread that would be neatly or a needle that would be neatly threaded.
Lisa, is all of this just the death of the idea of collective action in Canada? Like when the economy is bad, you can't have an environmental agenda because it's too expensive and it slows growth. And if the economy is good, oh, you can't do that. You're going to stop the good times. You know, there's always an argument not to do this. And yet, you know, the physics of the environment, they don't care.
Well, name me another country in the world that's having a conversation about whether or not we should export natural gas to India and China unless India and China can prove that they're displacing coal. I can tell you the answer to that, not a single one. And maybe in 2015, when everybody signed on to what we wanted to do in terms of targets, maybe that was the Pollyannish view on it. But it ain't that way now, because no one else has bellied up to the bar in order to do those kinds of things. Canada, yes, we are out in front. We are out ahead on these matters. But for us to start fretting about whether or not we're going to be able to hold up these unrealistic targets that nobody else in the world is actually trying to implement and put our own economy and our own unity in play as a result of that, well, I think we had our wake-up call in the election. Brad is right. Canadians overwhelmingly said that this is the direction they wanted to go in. They want to have the economy doing well. And I would also point out from an NDP point of view, look at what Premier Canoe is doing. I mean, he's talking about this as well in terms of wanting to make sure we're moving energy. So I don't think we should be hand-wringing about what Mark Carney is going to do or not going to do and how can he backtrack and what his reputation means. I think it's all over. I think the man's got to order to have pipelines in order to move our energy in this country and believe that we can do it safely and environmentally aware. I believe we can do it. So he should make sure he does that. That's all. Simple.
There you go. Vandana, last word to you then. How do you think he approached this, right? Because, the environmental agenda has been a core part, in his book and in his life's work over the last little while. And there is this enormous challenge for prosperity and growth in this country, arguably in the sake of unity.
Yeah, I think it's like taking not the militant form to it. It's like the and, it is, you can have pipelines and still invest in carbon capture. You can still invest in clean energy products. Like those things you can still do that. And I think that'll be important and to invest in that now so that when the time is right, you can still move forward on other things. I think that's important. And I think in terms of to India, you can't force India and China to do these things, but what can Canada do? You could still take a significant step globally to try to have cleaner energy in some way. And, India, I pay attention to a lot of the Indian media and what they're looking for. People are looking for cleaner because they are finding climate migrants now because it gets too hot in parts of the country. So they are looking for a change. I can't say that to China, but I think they will be interested in that. But it thinks people will make that shift. But I think it's about, again, being pragmatic. I think just because we build pipelines and find other ways to get energy to market doesn't mean we can't also do good things for the environment here.
Okay. Well, maybe the age of pragmatism begins tomorrow after the age of polarization for the past little while. All right. That is the end of the Age of the Power panel, though. Lisa Raitt, Brad Levine, Rob Russo, and Vandana Cotter.